Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Gravitas. Now, what if India sent troops to Afghanistan? The US is reportedly keen that India contribute to the fight against the Taliban there. After all, the conflict is in our region. But the issue, in fact, is complex. Here's a detailed report.
The Afghan National Army and the police have suffered severe reverses at Taliban hands in the past 2 years. Reports say the US military brass wants to send another 3,000 troops there to reinforce the 8,000 already present. But when the US could not defeat the Taliban with much larger forces some years ago, just what is the point? The US is reportedly keen on its NATO allies sending troops to Afghanistan. It is also keen that India contribute perhaps 15,000 troops, as some reports have suggested. The idea obviously is for other countries to share the US financial and logistical burden. It was a point made by none other than Shalabh Kumar of the US Republican Hindu Coalition a few months ago. He said, and I quote, "It will be nice if Indian soldiers could be there to support US forces in places like Afghanistan. It is my feeling that the Donald Trump administration wants India to partner counter-terror operations in Afghanistan," unquote. Such a decision would be politically very sensitive. The US and others have lost thousands of troops in Afghanistan and spent millions of dollars, all to little avail. Would India have to fight the Taliban? Would it have to secure areas, thereby freeing up the Afghan army? Or would it provide only assistance and training? Much will depend on what the Afghan government wants. And so far, there is no request for troops from them. Much will also depend on how serious the Afghan government situation is, the geopolitical dynamics, and of course, a political decision in Delhi. Bureau Report, Beyond.
All right, again, reporting in Kabul is WION's Daniele Pagani. He joins me live right now. Daniele, if you talk about the ground situation, what's happening in Kabul, the situation is far from in control at this point in time. You've had terror attacks, you had the Indian envoy's house being targeted, you've had, report of attack on US forces by allegedly Afghan personnel. What's the ground situation as far as foreign troops there are concerned?
Well, you said it right. The situation is far from being under control. When it comes to Kabul city right now, there is a relative calm, but this is just because the security is very heavy all around the city after the major attack happened on the 31st and the attack against the funeral of the victims and the clashes with protesters, between protesters and the police. So right now it's very calm in the city, but the Taliban are advancing in many parts of the country. It is believed that they now control 40% of the entire Afghanistan. And provinces like Nangarhar are becoming more and more dangerous and more on the offensive. Islamic State is there. The Taliban also are infiltrating, allegedly, the Afghan army. So this is the security situation. When it comes to the role that India plays right now, I interestingly had a meeting on Saturday with the Indian ambassador, Mr. Manpreet Bohra, here in Kabul inside the embassy. And he told me that, yes, their security is on high alert and they feel they are being targeted, but India has also always been a target in Afghanistan, so nothing has changed much for Indians living here in Afghanistan. They are always on the security alert. Just to let you know that all the Indian premises, all the personnel active within the Indian premises are here without a family. This is a non-family station, so only one person per family can come here and work within the Indian premises.
Right. Daniele, also, we do know, we're just going on the basis of these reports that we're hearing about, no official confirmation or any sort of communication from Kabul to New Delhi as far as deployment of troops is concerned. But we do know that the Afghan army, the police, they've suffered reverses as far as Taliban is concerned in the past couple of years. And the question that we just raised in our report is also, worth talking about. What, the foreign troops, the NATO troops, the US troops couldn't do. Is Afghanistan or is India hoping their troops will do that, fight and defeat Taliban?
So, a couple of things just to inform our viewers, to take them here up to pace. I spoke again with the ambassador and I asked if there was any talk on the table about the possible deployment of Indian troops in Afghanistan, and he said very clearly that there is absolutely no talk between the government of Afghanistan and the government of India regarding a possible deployment of troops right now. So we are talking about reports coming out of Washington, and clearly the Indian community in Washington, the Indian political community in Washington would like India to have a role here in Afghanistan. We are talking about possibly 15,000 troops and hopefully acting under the banner of the United Nations. So what is the problem regarding this? Probably India could act as a sort of neutral partner with the government of Afghanistan, but this is impossible on the ground. We have to remember that Pakistan, part of the Pakistani state, what we call the deep state, the intelligence of Pakistan, is supporting factions of the Taliban. Therefore, a possible Indian deployment could probably destabilize more the situation in Afghanistan, because this part of the deep Pakistani state could use the Taliban to increase the level of insecurity, really and only because Indian troops are deployed on the ground.
Right.
So this is one of the risks.
So it has to be a very calculated move, and from what you're saying, it could destabilize the situation further. But Daniele, if we were to go by previous reports, Afghanistan has been asking India to help others sort of, assist them in terms of weapons and other such things, equipments and stuff. But in September of 2016, Taliban clearly came out and warned India to stop giving any sort of lethal military equipment to Afghanistan government. Looking at that, how aggressive Taliban is and how it will perceive India's meddling in Afghanistan, should India be wary of that as well? And is India ready to take on?
Whether India is ready or not is difficult for me to say. Definitely India has an enormous military power. But again, if they act as a country and not under the banner of the United Nations, it will definitely destabilize the country. The Taliban, Sana, are very aggressive. They fight a guerrilla war. They have strongholds in large parts of the country. Controlling the 40% of Afghanistan is not a small thing. It means that nearly half of the country is under their control, be it by force, be it by fear, be it by support from the local population, whatever it is. It's the control of a large portion of country. Militarily, probably India could be ready to take this up, but we really have to keep in our mind that Pakistan is playing not the entire Pakistan and not the entire government of Pakistan. I would like to underline this, but the deep state and the intelligence services of Pakistan and some deviated association active in Pakistan are directly supporting the Taliban. So yes, if India wants to deploy military here in Afghanistan, they have to take into consideration that this action could also bring the war home, back to Delhi.
Right.
Because nothing says that the Taliban cannot infiltrate someone into India to perpetrate attacks, very dangerous attacks.
Right, there could be a massive backlash. Daniele, do stay with me. Let's get in Michael Kugelman at this point. He's a senior associate for South Asia at the Asia program. He joins me from Washington. Michael, thanks so much for joining us here on Gravitas. Now, India has already been engaging with Afghanistan for a while now, giving it equipment, providing helicopters and such deals, but boots on the ground. If we were to go by these new reports that are emerging, India is mulling sending 15,000 troops into Afghanistan. How real does this possibility seem to you?
Well, quite frankly, I think it's highly unlikely that India would make a decision to put boots on the ground in Afghanistan, whether we're talking about 15,000 or 50. I don't really see any sense in New Delhi that there would be a desire to do so. I would certainly contend that India's thinking about its policies in Afghanistan appear to be evolving. I mean, as you indicated, there is a very deep, strong relationship between India and Afghanistan. There's a strategic partnership agreement between the two countries that entails a fair amount of economic and diplomatic cooperation, as well as training. It involves Indian training of Afghan soldiers. But there's really has never been a strong level of military cooperation beyond training and some small arms sales because of the fear of provoking Pakistan. That said, I think you mentioned before, several years ago, India decided to transfer several fighter helicopters to Afghanistan, which was a big change. There had never been a case of India transferring or sending large military hardware into Afghanistan. And there also have been, as I understand, a number of visits by Afghan military officials to India trying to find out about the possibility of additional major arms deals. But I still think that to be talking about Indian boots on the ground in Afghanistan continues to be a red line, at least for now.
But Michael, you know, in Outlook Afghanistan, there is a Pajwalk dispatch that has been published, and it explicitly talks about a prominent Indian defense expert as telling a Washington audience on the 18th of May that New Delhi could perhaps be persuaded to set up a division of troops around 15,000 in total in Afghanistan under a United Nations peacekeeping mission. Do you think this is a US's ploy to drag its allies to share the financial and logistical burden on a level? What do you think about that? Do you think that is America's plan at this point?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure if the Trump administration is in a position now where it's going to be thinking about very complex strategies to try to get India to play more of a role in Afghanistan. I think that there really hasn't been that much thinking here in Washington about policy toward India on the whole, even though your prime minister is going to be coming here a bit later in the month. I mean, who knows, ultimately? I think that President Trump himself, if he is told of the deep relationship between India and Afghanistan and the good relationship between India and the U.S., who knows? Maybe he'd be inclined to think that it would make sense to urge India to provide some level of a military boots on the ground presence in Afghanistan, simply because President Trump himself is not well schooled in the intricacies of South Asian affairs. Though that said, he does have some pretty good advisors like H.R. McMaster and James Mattis, who really understand the South Asia context well. I'd like to think that the Trump administration would be realistic and feel that even if things are changing a bit for reasons that I just explained, I think it still is simply not an option at this point for New Delhi to put boots on the ground, even if it were to be under the guise of some type of UN type mission. I just don't see this happening.
Okay, and most of all, both New Delhi and Kabul must be convinced that it is absolutely in their best of strategic interest to go ahead with such a move. But having said that, Daniele, if these reports are to be believed, what sort of a role is New Delhi looking at in Afghanistan? Is it going to be active fighting or training and assistance to foreign troops or the Afghan troops in the region? That's also an important aspect that, both these countries will have to decide should this move become a reality in the days, weeks or months to come ahead.
Well, unfortunately, the details that we have right now do not allow us to say anything about it, because they just speak about a possible deployment of 15,000 soldiers. The ambassador said that there are no official talks. So what kind of role is India looking at? It's really impossible to say right now. Just one thing, if I may add that, roaming around the streets of Kabul and talking a little bit of these, which is a very sensitive issue because there are already many foreign troops on the ground. So the people are not very happy about talking of more foreign troops on the ground. The overall sentiment among the people that I have been talking is that India should actually not send boots on the ground because it's going to destabilize Afghanistan more. What they very much welcome is India investing and helping in developing, for instance, the mines industry, the mineral industry, and increasing the amount of expertise to invest in Afghanistan in order to infrastructure. So probably New Delhi should keep looking at economic ties with Afghanistan, expertise ties with Afghanistan, building more and more infrastructures in Afghanistan, which is probably going to bring more stability to the country than 15,000 troops, which I think are going to just destabilize Afghanistan more.
All right. Michael, would you agree with what Daniele just said? And also, another question that is very important when we talk about India and Afghanistan is Pakistan. What about Pakistan's sensitivities about having Indian presence in Afghanistan? That's also a big factor that needs to be taken into account.
Well, absolutely. And as I said before, I think one of the major reasons why India has held off from putting boots on the ground in Afghanistan is for fear of provoking Pakistan and what that could mean in terms of how Pakistan would respond. I think it could entail tightening ties to the Taliban and the Haqqani network and trying to get them to target Indian interests in Afghanistan, or Indian troops for that matter. So obviously Pakistan is always a major consideration in this context. But, in terms of what Indian troops in Afghanistan would mean, I defer to your correspondent who's been speaking to Afghans on the ground. But indeed, my sense is that Afghans are simply fed up with war. And, I think that increasingly they feel that having this extended foreign troop presence in Afghanistan has not brought peace in Afghanistan. In fact, you could argue it's made things worse because it's brought propaganda victories to the Taliban, and it's given the Taliban extra ammunition to recruit folks to its cause, to say, well, we need to fight all we can to remove all these foreign troops. So, certainly I think that there's something to be said for foreign troops being able to provide a modicum of stability, and I say that in the sense that they can provide much-needed training and advice to Afghan forces, and that's why I think that there's really something to be said for a continued open-ended, non-combat troop presence on the part of the U.S. and its NATO allies. And as I said earlier, India has already been providing training and advice to military troops in Afghanistan. But, if you're talking about sending more troops into Afghanistan, whether from India or anywhere else, to actually fight the war on the ground, I think that the costs are simply too high. Right. That could end up being a very reckless, dangerous decision and outcome, and something that ultimately the Afghans themselves, the Afghans on the street, so to speak, would not want.
Absolutely. In fact, Daniele, the cost is an important factor. We are talking about India, a country where 325,000 or more troops are deployed in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the cost of maintaining them. And then we talk about sending troops into Afghanistan, where the terrain is much tougher. There are no roads like we have in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. The terrain is definitely much more tougher. So the question is, if it was such a wise move, why didn't India do it earlier? And what about the costs? It definitely has to take all of that into account before going ahead and making this commitment to Kabul. Daniele, this question was for you.
Oh, sorry. No, yes, of course. And look, I think it was a very wise decision taken from India not to send any soldier on the ground. As I told repeatedly, I think that even if India manages to send soldiers on the ground under the banner of the United Nations, this is going to be only a move which will destabilize further the region, because obviously the deep state of Pakistan will play against this move. And this could mean more instability of Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan. Many of the people of Afghanistan, at least the people I am meeting, they are fed up with war. They are fed up with this foreign presence, foreign troops. They don't need more boots on the ground. If someone needs to fight this war and to win against the Taliban, it's the Afghan army. So perhaps this is where India could come and help, because unfortunately the fighting power of the Afghan army is very good. I mean, men are very well trained. They are unfortunately used to fighting wars and on difficult terrains. But what they are lacking nowadays, and I've been speaking with the general of the Afghan army the day before yesterday, and he very much complained the fact that equipment, good up to standard equipment, is very much missing on the ground. We are talking about basic needs: ammunition, good weapons, bulletproof jackets. These very basic. Afghanistan cannot send their sons to fight against the Taliban without good equipment. So perhaps that it would be wiser for India to give them this kind of equipment, more training. But again, I would sending Indian troops on the ground would be a move which will destabilize Afghanistan further. And probably they will not be very much welcomed by the people of Afghanistan, who are very much fed up of war, foreign troops, and problems in their very own land. They want to look ahead, which is currently impossible because the Taliban keep advancing. So unfortunately, a war needs to be fought. But this is the reality, I think.
Absolutely. Michael, before you joined in, Daniele was talking about, we were talking about how what additional troops over the years with the U.S. intervention could not achieve, which is defeating the Taliban, then how can now Indian troops getting involved, how would they make things any better? Do you also agree with that ultimately it is going to be the other activities, helping rebuild Afghanistan that holds more importance, more significance for a country like India, rather than achieving a target which, forces have been trying to achieve but still haven't?
No, this is a very good point and a complicated one to answer. I mean, my major soundbite here, and it's always been this for a number of years, is, the U.S. had 100,000 troops in Afghanistan several years ago, and it didn't end the war and it didn't bring stability. There's only so much that combat troops can do, and I think that the biggest value that foreign soldiers can provide in Afghanistan is on the training mission to try to fill gaps in capacity within the Afghan security forces, which are still very significant. We had this horrible attack in Kabul on May 31st that killed so many people in a high security area. There have been a number of attacks like that. There have been intelligence failures in Afghanistan, and I think that the collection of intelligence processing, this has been a major constraint for the Afghan security forces and also the Afghan state for a number of years. And I think this is an area where, Americans, NATO, India, for example, as well, could step in and provide support in this regard in terms of training. Air support, air cover, is something else. Training the Afghans in essentially learning how to provide air cover, do it better than they do it now. So I think that's where the value lies. I think that it's much better and much more productive to be having conversations about how Afghanistan's friends can help supplement and strengthen this ongoing training mission. Sending troops to fight, I think there simply are too many costs. And, in the case of the U.S., you have a very war-weary society that simply does not want troops being sent to Afghanistan to fight wars anymore. So, at the end of the day, I think it's very risky to go down that path of thinking about sending troops to fight in a country where, after almost 16 years of war, foreign troops have not been able to bring an end to that war, and I think that's something that's not going to change.
Absolutely. You're saying it should be taken as a lesson. Yes, Daniele, please come in.
Can I just add one example?
Sure.
I'm sorry. Like this morning, I visited the Afghan Mine Detection Center, which is an internationally renowned center for demining operations. They have been successfully clearing the 75% of landmines present right now in the country. So only 25% of these landmines are left. And the director told me that they are now facing a severe shortage of international fundings. So that perhaps could be another place, another thing that India could do in order to help Afghanistan, for instance.
Well, point noted. It seems to be, pointless as we conclude. But who knows if these reports are to be believed? Many questions that need to be answered. How will India bear the cost? Is it ready to bear the cost? If this is a wise move, why now? And what will be the role in case India goes ahead in sending these 15,000 troops in Afghanistan? We'll have to end this discussion. Thanks so much, Michael, for joining us. Also, Daniele Pagani, there, WION's correspondent, reporting live from Kabul.